Hello comic book fans! Are you ready for the penultimate list with my favorite graphic novels, trades, omnibi collected comic editions of 2016? Science fiction is one of my favorite genres, not only in comics, but especially comics are a great medium to fantasize about visions of tomorrow and after tomorrow. These predicting stories can go in both ways: the optimistic path to a brighter, or at least more interesting future with space travel beyond new horizons, or the rather pessimistic path downhill into a dark world where social injustice and tyrants rule while the rest struggles to survive. Like in the oligarchic world of Lazarus. The second oversized hardcover with glued binding came out in 2016. I have read volume 1, which is amazing, but haven't read this one, so it's not included in the upcoming top 10. Otherwise, it would be under the top 3 of the list. I'm pretty sure about that. On 10 on that list is volume 5 of the Gold Key Archives of Star Trek. Honestly, this is just for the hardcore Star Trek fan because the stories are pretty offbeat and weird. The protagonists often out of character and some mistakes are plain out bad. For an instance, Lieutenant Uhura is replaced with a white Lieutenant Uhuru. Yeah. The art by Alberto Giolitti is nothing special as well. But hey, I'm a huge fan of the original series of Star Trek, and all that B-comic goofiness adds to my reading pleasure in a weird way. These books are expensive but very well made, and this is my top 10 after all, so I just have to include it here. Rank 9 is Southern Cross by Andy Belanger, or however, written by Becky Cloonan, and with nicely fitting dark colors by Lee Lurich. This takes place when space travel has become some sort of public transportation. We follow the journey of a woman who wants to find out why her sister had to die on the refinery moon. The actual story is actually a bit thin and out of focus in my opinion, but the strength of that comic is definitely the depiction of how it feels to be a passenger on a spaceship. The sinister atmosphere is a tiny bit like Agatha Christie in space. On 8 we have the Metabaron. The Metabaron singular, as opposed to the Metabarons, the groundbreaking series drawn by Juan Jimenez. This is drawn by Valentin Sechet and written by Jerry Frisson, after the idea of Alejandro Jodorowsky, of course. The English edition from Humanoids contains the first 2 albums, Wilhelm 100 and Conrad, in one volume with 112 pages and the title The Antibaron. A new spin-off of the Metabarons, and therefore of the Incal as well, is always a big deal for me. In this book, the last Metabaron fights against the Techno-Fathers and their sort of uber-Nazi hench soldier Wilhelm, and returns to Marmola, the planet of his ancestors. This is definitely depressing dark science fiction. Especially the enemies of the Metabaron are just mean sadistic villains, pure evil. Darth Vader is a mild-mannered philanthrope in comparison. In my book, the one-dimensionality of the opponents of the Metabaron seems to be the weakness of the new series, but we'll see. The art from Valentin Sechet is very fitting, partwise spectacular, especially the depiction of the technology. When it comes to the depiction of the characters, and in particular facial expressions, his photorealistic art is sometimes too photorealistic, which means too heavily depending on photographs. But maybe that's just my taste. On rank 7, there's the last volume of Storm, The Choral of Kiss Me. It's number 29 in the series and number 7 after Don Lawrence had left the building. Storm and his allies meet their old arch-enemy Marduk and have to fight through a garden of colorful corals. It's an absolute pleasure for the eyes and still one of the best ongoing comics. Period. Regardless that Romano Molinar probably won't never be able to compete with the beauty of Don Lawrence's art. But at least the coloring by Jörg de Vos delivers a good and healthy touch of Don Lawrence-like feel. On 6. Again, Star Trek. The classic UK comics, Volume 1 from 1969 to 1970. The first of 3 volumes collecting British Star Trek weekly comics published by the Library of American Comics and IDW. The stories were originally published in serialized form, generally 2 to 3 pages at a time, starting in 1969, 6 months before the TV series premiered in England. In fact, the creators of the comic most probably haven't seen one episode, but had just some photo reference material and rudimentary information to figure out what this series is all about. So it's no wonder that a lot of the characters are wary of, and some of the basic concepts are simply ignored. The funniest mistake they made is maybe to call Kirk Captain Kurt or Captain Kurt in the first couple of episodes. But in other regards, some fantastic space yarn is spun here, and the art is of some glorious pulp quality. Especially the strips that one Harry Lindfield drew, and he did the most of them. Unfortunately, the format of the Lindfield strips and the format of this collected edition don't go very well together. So some of the panels got split or even eaten in the fold, despite of the actually good sewn binding. Starting the upper half of the top 10. On 5, we have the most recent and maybe the most ambitious work of Daniel Clowes, about a man who tries to save the life of his wife through time travel. It's a pretty typical Clowes story with a lot of awkward characters who don't say what they think and don't realize their own true motivations. In short, characters that are so flawed like you and I, and therefore pretty relatable. And it's of course done in the signature Clowes art style, in a deliberate pastel color scheme. But somehow it failed the big expectations many people had after the 2-year or so long break from the Independent Superstar. Independent Superstar is actually a contradiction on its own, obviously, so no wonder he failed some expectations. But Patience is nevertheless a damn good read, ambitious and fun, complicated and easy to follow. Although I have to say it's by far not Clowes' best work until now, and the finish was, spoiler warning, not that big of a surprise to me, and left some of the time travel paradoxa out in the open. Continuing with the theme of a very good book of another favorite artist of mine who has done even better books before, it's The Theory of the Grain of Sand by Francois Scoyton, written by Benoit Peters. It's another title in their Obscure Cities cycle. The German version here was published before, but I know that IDW put out an English translation in 2016, so I include it here. Even though it's not really a science fiction comic, more fantasy, or better, a fantastic, retro-futuristic, steampunkish comic about the merging of two worlds in mystical ways. Architecture plays again a big role, and we meet some familiar characters again, even though you don't have to know anything about them to enjoy the story. But this is true for nearly every story of Scoyton and Peters, so my recommendation, get as much Scoyton as you can. You won't regret it. On 3, it's Trian. These German editions are published pretty quickly. So we are already up to number 7. An European sci-fi classic, nothing less. Pulp retro futurism at its best. These stories are from 1968 and 1969. Watch panellogy 119 for more information about Trian. Rank 2 is The Private Eye by Marcus Martin, written by Brian K. Vaughan with colors from Munza Vicente. Okay, I'm cheating here a bit because this book was published already in December 2015, but I'm pretty sure that it was available not before January 2016. Anyhow, this book is the bomb, people. A crime noir story with all the typical ingredients, but in a future without internet. Because the internet was brought down after a catastrophic burst of the data cloud. Several weeks, all private data, everyone's search history, and so on, was out in the open. And it caused an almost total collapse of the society. After that, nothing was like before, and this world is fleshed out by Martin and Vaughan meticulously and intelligent, and with an endless love for every detail. This book is a joy to read, and it is political, and it makes you think. No story you will forget ever. For me, it's up there with Brave New World or 1984. So, obviously it was a close race, but my favorite science fiction title of 2016 is Terminal City by Michael Lark, written by Dean Motter. The thick, oversized library edition from 2016 from Dark Horse contains issue 1 to 9 of Terminal City and issues 1 to 5 of Terminal City Aerial Graffiti. The Terminal City storyline stems from the 90s, and we see a very different side of Michael Lark compared to his more realistic and darker work on Lazarus or Gotham Central. Here he works more in a ligne claire style, and the colors by Rick Taylor are very flat and bright. It's the tale of a group of daredevils, primarily one Cosmo Quinn, the human fly, who scales the tallest buildings in Terminal City, the city to end all cities. Usually I'm not into steampunkish stories at all, unless they are done by Francois Scoyton. But this is a big exception. This world full of zeppelins, magnetic trains, bad-tempered transistor tube robots and Easter eggs everywhere reminded me quite a bit of Alan Moore's Top 10, which is another favorite of mine. But that was my top 10 for now, and in the next episode I'll wrap up my videos about the best books of 2016 with comics about the real life. And that much I can tell you, this will be a fun list. Thanks for listening and watching. Goodbye.